Welcome to the Hadassah Collective. I'm your host, Claire Marrinan. The Hadassah Collective Podcast brings together a carefully curated selection of my most trusted and inspiring innovators from every area of the health and wellness space. I invite my guests to freely share their gifts, their wisdom, their journeys, and their diverse points of view, discussing a whole range of topics, including yogic science, present-day philosophy, integrated diet and fitness, modern mental health, non-denominational religion, and holistic lifestyle. All of this to inspire our community with accessible tools to align each individual with who they truly are created to be, to consciously evolve their lives and extend their unique divine light into the world. In this episode, I speak with Iona Holloway, the best-selling author of Ghost, Why Perfect Women Shrink, and the creator of Muck Gold and the Soul Breathwork app, which is an app that I personally use each day. In this episode, we cover a variety of topics from perfectionism, the dilemma and challenges as the gifted, competent child, life beyond restrictive eating, inner child healing, and embodiment and empowered, authentic visibility. I'm a big fan of Iona's fluff-free, no bullshit approach to self-empowerment, and I think you will be too. Hi, Iona. Welcome to the Hadassah Collective. I'm so looking forward to having this conversation with you, deep diving into Ghost and also Brave. So welcome.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here, and it's nice to hear a kind of British voice as well.
It's somewhat comforting, isn't it, when you've been away from home for a while?
It certainly is. It certainly is.
Sure. So why don't we just start off with, if you could give our listeners just a brief overview of who you are and what you do and whereabouts on the earth you are at the moment.
Yeah, sure. So my name's Iona. I'm originally from Scotland, but I've lived in Boston for the best part of the last decade. I moved to the US when I was 20, when I was recruited to play collegiate sports, which was one of those adventures that I had no idea what I was getting myself into until I was here. And now I work as a coach. I'm an author and a speaker. And I work with strong but invisibly struggling women in helping them become visible first to themselves and then to the world through sharing their gifts. My book, my best-selling book, Ghost, Why Perfect Women Shrink, came out in January. I'm excited to chat a little bit more about that today. And then I'm also in the process of founding Brave Thing, which is going to be a wider platform to continue to share my kind of blunt, kind, but creative take on self-healing, self-development for strong women who perhaps don't always think that they are able to receive help from others. And as a former ghost, as a former lone wolf, I see the founding of Brave Thing as me really giving back and sharing everything I've learned in my own healing journey to help those who also feel invisible and alone. So I'm really happy to be here to chat more about it.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm a real big fan of your book, Ghost. I thought that it was just such an honest and deep portrayal of your own personal experience and sort of presented in a way that really, I think, definitely connected with me, and I'm sure it's connected with many other people in quite a deep way. And it's so intertwined, obviously, with your personal story. So I guess we can start at the beginning. And you grew up in Scotland. You're from Scotland. And what did your childhood look like? And how did that sort of shape the beginnings of this story?
Yeah, it informs everything. I think anyone who thinks that we just experience our childhood and then step over some kind of boundary and become adults and forget everything that happened there, we're kidding ourselves. I really believe that we establish our blueprints for both our identity and the way that we find our way to survive and make our own space in the world in those formative years. And I always like to say this and reinforce it, is that Ghost is not a witch hunt. Exploring The impact of your childhood on your life is not a witch hunt. It's not a blame game. It's not ruminating on the past. It's really understanding. It's kind of like an archaeological dig into who was I? Like, how did I become myself? And how is the way that I learned to be in this world still impacting me now? And for me, I very much grew up as what I would call an invisible child, which then became a ghost woman. So in Ghost, I classify an invisible child as a child who's very much on her own from the start. And often the reason why she's on her own is because she's perceived as an incredibly competent and strong first child and then young woman. And I was the child that no one worried about. I was independent. I took care of myself. And I also really shone. I really shone in school. Everything came quite easily to me for a long time. And over the period of my childhood and into early adulthood, the story of she's perfect, must be easy for her, she doesn't struggle, became wrapped around me and really formed this core identity and belief in myself that one, I was expected to be perfect, two, I wasn't allowed to struggle, and three, any indication of vulnerability or not immediately getting something or being the best at something, it felt like it was going to be an annihilation. And perhaps just you listening to this, maybe you've had your own experience of that. But how that ended up becoming embodied in me was through the really ruthless manipulation, shrinking, and starving and controlling of my body. And I talk about it as my embodied suffering. It was almost the way I channeled all of the things that I wasn't allowed to express, the emotions that I didn't feel safe to express. I channeled that energy into the control of my body. And so I don't actually, in my own healing, I'm at that point now where I don't really talk about it as an eating disorder. I really more talk about it as the way I exercise my control and energy and channeling of pain into the shrinking of my body. It became my coping strategy. It became the way I felt both strong and seen. And over the years, that just intensified and it grew in its own way. And soon that very experience, which had once been a very protective way that I took care of myself, became a really, really, really big problem in my life. And it took nearly 20 years for me to be honest about the fact that it was a problem. And that's what kind of brought me here today, was finally deciding that that was something that needed to change.
Incredible. And I think just as you were speaking, I sort of just noticed a really interesting paradox there, as the invisible child versus from the outside perspective, an outsider looking in, it was probably, you're so visible, you know. Mm-hmm. And so it's that disconnect, that kind of terrifying disconnect of how I'm really feeling inside, but how people are experiencing me in the world. And I think that that's really something important to recognize, to be able to heal as well.
Yeah, and I think so many of the women I work with operate under that is the tension of their lives. It is that external perception that others have, that mask or that performance. I often say this about the kind of women that resonate with my work. We're not lacking in the glitter. Like we're not, most of the time we're doing pretty well. We can point to perhaps our career that's been good, or achievements that we've had, or we have visible gifts that people reinforce for us. But those all must mask that underbelly, that feeling of, I can't show any of this because they think I'm really strong. They think I'm perfect. I can't in any way talk about the fact that sometimes stuff's hard for me. In Ghost, I call this being gaslighted by your gifts. That's what it feels like, that disconnect between the external perception of how people experience us and our internal reality, which is often very different. It certainly was for me.
Absolutely. And I think something else that you touched on the book that really resonated with me was, you are never, it's actually positive reinforcement. You know, I feel so bad for parents listening to this, because it's like, of course, you want to encourage your children in their gifts and to really shine. And, that's amazing. But I think that there was a really important lesson that you touched on in the book about you never learned how to fail. You never learned that you would be loved if you did fail. And I think that that's something really, really important, and something that I noticed in my own life as well. And so can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. I think I say something like I never realized that I could be bad at something and loved in spite of that failure or vulnerability or weakness. And something that I want to make really clear is that my parents were not parents that were putting like pressure on me in the sense of verbal pressure. Like there was none of that. They weren't overbearing. They weren't saying you must do this. It was more the kind of collective feeling of what was reflected back to me. It was almost about the way that other people were talking about me, not directly to me. So teachers telling parents how talented I was, friends telling parents how talented I was. This whole story around Iona's not someone that struggles. Iona's naturally very gifted. Iona's such a strong, independent, like black sheep, kind of confusing little girl. These were all the stories that became who I was. And I think that for some people, I know this is different. I know for some of my clients, parents are very involved in their lives. And again, that setting of a standard ends up having its own challenges when we're not safe to just do what we want, or when the pressure is coming externally. And I think that for me, I always like to say, like, we come into the world the way that we are. We come in with specific tendencies. I'm pretty sure I came out in this, like, I was born into this world like an independent and relatively strong and resilient child. And then the inputs that landed in that system distorted and reinforced that in ways that ended up being painful and destructive. So no, I never learned that I could get a B and that would be okay. I never learned how to be middle of the class. All I ever had was A's, captains, representing countries, getting free scholarships to universities, even though people had never seen me play, getting raises without asking for them. I had no idea who I was if none of that was there. And that is a terrifying feeling, because over years it compounds into a level of performance and pressure that, like, the longer it goes and the more evidence you have that your life is easy and the more that's reflected back to you, the stakes get so high. All you can do is like put your head down and keep going, because what happens if you don't?
Yeah, and you're just paddling under the surface to keep it all going. And I think it's also that you sort of maybe never had the opportunity to really discover who you really were without these things, right? That's something that then I think the longer that goes on for, the scarier that reality becomes. The bigger the gap between the performance and who you really are becomes, and therefore it becomes even scarier to face that. So I think that's interesting. And also, what advice would you give to parents that I know listen to this podcast that are, that have these children that just are so naturally capable? And in some ways, it's so funny because, when you're a child, you always see your parents as like this godlike authority figure kind of thing. And I feel really blessed to say that I know without a shadow of a doubt that even though my parents are flawed human beings, they really did want the best for my brother and I. So it was never a case of them pushing their own agenda. And it's so funny now to observe some of my friends with children, and they're sort of like, with some of their kids, they're so kind of gifted and so independent that they almost feel out of their depth, that they don't really have anything to add as a parent, And so what advice would you give to parents who sort of feel that way and do have these children that are gifted? They want to encourage these beautiful gifts in them, but they also want to encourage them to explore who they really are.
Yeah, it's a beautiful question. And again, what I'm offering here is from like the perspective of not yet being a parent. So I can only really speak as an invisible child, I guess. Yeah. I think that a huge part of what I was missing in my development as a gifted child was any kind of sense of emotional intelligence, like any kind of sense of like introspection, or any kind of sense of how is my body actually feeling, or is there a safe place for me to express my emotions? Are there spaces where I have the capacity to do that, the safety to do that? I don't really think I had no access to those experiences, like the talking about emotions, the talking about pressure. Those kind of explicit conversations were not something that I never had. It was always the defaulting that Iona's fine, Iona's got it handled. So I feel like at some point in the work that I do in building Brave Thing, it is going to be about, can we get emotional intelligence, awareness, and self-regulation and practicing of vulnerability? Are these things that we can learn in school? Are these things that parents can learn in and of themselves so they can share them with their children? In my work that I do now, I call it the installation of baseline awareness and kindness. These are not tools that I learned until I was nearly 30.
Yeah.
Those kind of tools were not things that I even had conscious awareness of. So that's what I would offer. I would also offer, let your children play, like in whatever capacity that is, where what they're doing doesn't have outcome on top of it, or there isn't an expectation of what they should be achieving, or things like that. I think play for gifted children falls out of our lives very young, because our gifts are recognized and then they're immediately channeled, like they're channeled into performance. And that's how our work becomes externalized, because the things that are naturally beautiful about us become things that we can like commoditize or use or advance us. And we really need space to play. We really need space to do things for no reason other than pure enjoyment. And those are all things that I've had to relearn as like someone in my late 20s and early 30s. What's fun?
Absolutely. I totally understand what you're saying. And so let's talk about the moments that the rubber really meets the road with you in your own life, and that I guess these sort of dark nights of the soul moments, and when you sort of really realize like I'm trying to control, but I'm actually not in control of this, and this has gotten beyond a point that's actually in my control. In terms of, I know you don't call it disordered eating, but in terms of the physical effects on your body, and where it sort of came to you that it like something has to change.
Yeah. It really, for me, came down to a point where my body just started to give up. So for context, for perhaps those who haven't read Ghost, I was very much a restrictive eater, but also a binger. I wasn't someone that used purging, my way of controlling, for what felt like or were like large binges, whereas over exercising. So those were the different ways that I managed and manipulated my body. And I would say that I always call it, like, I would go through phases of being very successful. So where I was being very adherent to whatever ridiculous diet I was on. And I was also doing really well with exercise, and the phases of the binging were minimized, but it required so much willpower. And because I had no other coping strategies, because binging was actually the way I let myself numb, feel nothing at all, escape the pressure of my perfect life, that was the only coping strategy I had. So it always came back. So my weight would vary, like I'm going to say like through my 20s, but it only ever really changed by 5 pounds, maybe 10. Most people had no idea. Like they didn't notice the changes whatsoever, but it felt monstrous to me. And the intensity to which I dieted and restricted and exercised increased. So by the time I was in my late 20s, I was tracking everything down to the macro. I had a coach. I would send photos of myself basically naked, front, back, sides. Every week, she would reduce my calories further. And I mean, I asked her to do that. So she was only doing what I asked her to do. I was also exercising at this point up to 4 hours a day, like morning sessions, after work immediately going as well. And at this point, my skin was hurting. I would say I was in a very numb. Again, I don't like to diagnose anxiety or depression because I see them more as like stages of the nervous system that you're inhabiting. But I was very kind of disassociated. I was very, very numb and low. And it got to a point where like I didn't have a period most of my 20s, and I just could no longer adhere to the strictness of my regimes. So I would start diets and binge within 2 hours of starting them. And it really felt like my body was reaching this point of like, it was like, we can't do this anymore. And the most sort of distilled memory I have of this is one summer for a whole week, taking the week off work and eating close to 10,000 calories a day. I would go and exercise for 2 hours, which was stupid. And then once my partner was out of the house, I would just basically eat until I passed out and do that. And I felt crazy. I felt like I was an insane person. It felt like I had no control over myself or my body or anything anymore. And you're right, it was very much a dark night of the soul, and ghosts, I call it the reckoning. It was really that moment of, we can't do this anymore. This is not working. It was at that point where I would look at the mirror and not even recognize my own face. I just said no. I felt so broken. And it was really at that point of feeling like this can't get lower, that I was surrendered enough to choose to, I basically was forced to find a new way. I think in Alcoholics Anonymous, like they call this like hitting the bottom. That's really what it felt like for me. And I'm grateful for that bottom, because it made my next step easy. It's like, not this, okay, what then?
Yeah. And what was that next step? Like what different wellness modalities and practices supported you in moving through those next steps? And was it a sort of linear process for you? Was it a linear process, or was it okay, let's take this next step and then, oh my God, I can't do this, I have to revert back to my exercise and binging? Or was it that moment that you were like, I can't do this anymore, and then you moved straight out of it?
Great question. I would love to say that I never did any of my destructive behaviors ever, not even destructive, wildly protective behaviors. I never used them in any like ever again. And the reality of any healing journey is that you're going to fall on your face over and over and over again. You're going to go back to, because again, it was my coping strategy. Restriction was my coping strategy. Binging was my coping strategy. Exercise were my coping strategies. And it took time for me to displace those with more like beautiful and empowered coping strategies that didn't cause me physical and emotional pain. But one thing I did do, and this was pretty linear, was I did stop dieting. I completely stopped tracking, controlling my food. I completely stopped weighing myself. I very much did that. And that was hugely important and beneficial for me, because we don't actually realize when we're in a state of survival and barely eating and barely sleeping because I don't have enough food in my body to sleep. It's incredible what just eating enough and sleeping enough raised my level of ability to even begin to notice other things about myself. So that was one part of it that was pretty linear. But in terms of understanding myself, gaining awareness of who I was, why I was the way that I was, that all comes in peaks and valleys. I never like to talk about steps back. I just don't believe in that model of regression. It's really more just like increasing your capacity to sit with what is and find a way to not leave yourself lying on the floor. But I mean, there's kind of, I guess, expansion and contraction in your ability to sit with yourself. And I took a non-traditional, I guess, approach. I didn't go to traditional therapy. I enrolled in a group program, but I also was a true student. I started really, because there's only ever, I always say this to my clients, there's only so much you can do in an hour-long call a week. There's only so much you can do with what material or supportive material is provided for you. If your goal is for change, like real change, felt change, a real difference in the way you're living your life, you have to prioritize it. You can't expect anyone else to do your healing for you. It's an embodied experience. It has to be felt through and it can't be thought through, and no one is coming to save you. So we have to learn how to do that ourselves. It's beautiful. And I mean, that's why I do this work, to have an empathic someone on the other side who gets it, who's supporting you, who's holding space for you longer perhaps than you can do it for yourself. That's all beautiful, and I'm a big believer in that. But I am also a big believer in being a self-guided student and practitioner of your healing work. No one's going to do it for you. So I would say I did a mixture of group coaching. I got really into taking a more embodied approach. So breathwork, understanding things from a trauma-informed lens, visualizations, using creativity, which I love to do now with my clients, and bringing the body along for the ride, like healing the body as much as the mind is being healed. The body and the soul are also coming back to life as well. So I've been through like loads of phases and stages, and things that used to resonate with me don't anymore. And that's all part of being a student. But I'm a big believer in finding someone who can witness you, who can see you, especially as a ghost woman. Having someone who sees you is huge. And also learning how to see yourself is huge. Because once you are able to witness yourself, that's also when you can start being seen in the world for who you actually are and building your capacity for bravery there as well, whatever that looks like for you.
I agree. I totally agree. I think, almost validating yourself and your sort of right to exist in the world, be feeling exactly what you're feeling is like a hugely important step. And I love that you said in quite these words, but like taking responsibility for your own healing as well. I think that that's something very, very important, because I also think it's incredibly valuable in whatever you're embarking on to have a coach. I think, or someone that you that is ahead on the path, further along the path than you are. But I also think that it's like it kind of it can really breed this sort of codependent or dependent expression of that. And I think the only way to navigate those expansion and contraction moments is to be able to, you're the only one that can really witness that. And so to be able to work through those, like you really have to have that responsibility yourself to recognize, okay, I'm going back there. I'm moving out of this. I'm going back there. And really, I think you can only do that for yourself.
Yeah. And I think it's that fine balance. I think, especially with the book, the kind of book that Ghost is, the woman that I wrote it for, where a lot of us are islands. We're very practiced in being over here by ourselves, handling it. And so there is that balance of, can I be witnessed? Can I allow myself to be held by someone? Can I practice my vulnerability in a really safe space? I see that so much of my role when I'm working with women is I'm the place where you practice bringing yourself in all of your imperfection and your incompleteness. And the days where you show up and you are not doing great, you show up anyway. because you're practicing being seen in the ways that you were not able to do when you were tiny, when you were younger. That's you practicing being seen. That's you healing just by showing up. And also, yes, like, this was kind of, I won't say drilled into me, but it very much landed in me from perhaps a very young age, and then reinforced from a different angle when I started doing this work. No one is coming to save you. No one is responsible for your healing. The only person that can do that work is you, because you are in your body and you are the scrapbook of memories and moments that have come to be who you are. And so you really are the only person who can bear witness to that. Like, other people can support you in it, but unless you're really willing to turn your eyes inwards, knock on that door and say, like, what is going on here? I'm ready to actually see myself. I'm not out here pretending, like manipulating my external reality to try to create this perfect pretense. I'm really looking inwards. And then the magical part is that once we actually get honest and look inwards and actually see ourselves for who we are and start to feel that, our external world takes care of itself. It shifts to reflect our inner reality. But again, you are you. Like, I am me, you are you. You have to be that person for yourself. Like, no pill, no protocol, no method, no beautiful coach with all the knowledge in the world is going to give you that. You have to give that gift to yourself. And it doesn't have to be every day for 17 hours, but what you can tolerate, and then practice and grow from there.
Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about what is a ghost woman and an invisible child, and why do you feel it's important to put a name to the experience that you describe in the book?
Oh, I love this question, because it was a challenging one for me, because I've found labels they can be deeply unhelpful, especially when they pathologize things or symptomize us or diagnose us in any particular way. The reason I landed on invisible child and ghost woman, because they felt like very pure distillations and expressions of lived experiences, very much tailored to the idea of being seen or not being seen, being revealed or being completely hidden. So I don't have sort of a Merriam-Webster definition of an invisible child, other than it's a child that doesn't get help, someone who doesn't feel seen in the truth of who they are, which turns into a ghost woman. So a woman who hides in plain sight, often a strong but invisibly struggling woman. So I think both, I mean, they're obviously connected by invisible and ghost, but it really is connected to that feeling of us being seen in ways and invisible in ways.
Wow. And what are some of the behavioral indicators that someone might be a ghost? Or do you think that ghost women tend to know instinctively that something's wrong?
I don't think we tend to know it instinctively, because we're often very positively validated for our coping strategies. And like I said, like, we're normally very positively reinforced for all the ways that we struggle. So in all of our overworking and in all of our overachieving and in all of our strength and in all of our independence, these are all things that are positively reinforced by society, in a way that being a woman who's like really sweet and also sort of in service of others, that's like a different thing. I would say that in general, ghost women trend towards the opposite. It's more like that high achieving, run through a concrete wall, very strong and sort of island like woman. That's the sort of difference or distinction that I would make in the experience that I've had doing through my own life, and also through the work that I've done with my clients.
It's like harder texture.
Yes. Yeah. I also, something else I think that I've also noticed in the work that I do is ghost women are women who have an incredible capacity to hold. So, for example, like some of my clients have this like massive emotional capacity to feel intensity. So perhaps you would you would label them as highly sensitive or highly empathetic. And I look at it more as just having this huge capacity and gift to feel things and to hold things, and how that is a beautiful thing that often ends up getting weaponized. So that's another thing that I've noticed as well with my clients. If they're not that sort of hardened steel column, they're this like incredible sponge like entity that's able to feel massively, which ends up again being, it can be really challenging to know how to use that in an empowered way.
Yeah, it reminds me of a story. When I first went to a therapist, actually, this holistic psychotherapist, and I was so against any kind of therapy. I always just thought it was the most self-indulgent thing to pay someone to talk about yourself. I just thought it was ridiculous. Yeah. And I remember sitting down with her, and before it even said anything, she said, "Oh, you're a really strong girl." And I was like, "Yeah, I am," and I always thought that was a compliment. And she just like sort of gave me this knowing look and was like, sometimes, you can be too strong for too long. And it was the first moment that I ever realized, hang on, maybe I have weaponized this capacity for strength, right? And so
yeah,
that's a really interesting parallel. Something I sort of want to sort of pivot back to is in the way that society, that it's positively reinforced. The destructive behaviors or the behaviors that are harming you are sort of positively reinforced. And I think I'm probably about 5 years older than you. But when I was in high school age or secondary school in England, it was really a culture of size zero. Every celebrity was, trying to be size zero. Nicole Richie and Victoria Beckham were disappearing before our eyes, in the press. And when I look back now at some of the things that I was doing, I was just like, this is insane, but at the time, everybody was doing it. So it was almost like reinforced. Like, I mean, even at school, like my friends and I would talk about like what we had eaten, and sort of hold each other accountable. And no one picked up on the fact that this is crazy, those sorts of things. And again, the positive achievements, things like that. Did you feel that way as well, that like society was just supporting and praising these behaviors that you sort of instinctively knew at some level were kind of destroying?
Yeah, I mean, 100%. And I think that I definitely saw the sort of fashion Heat magazine, like Grazia, Vogue stuff. And then also I was this high performance athlete as well. So I was looking at the athletes in the Olympics and at Wimbledon and looking at their bodies and almost aspiring more towards that. It wasn't so much this like tiny thin thing, although I probably would have loved that as well. But I was seeing these like very strong but tiny bodies and thinking and really feeling like that was something that I should have been looking like. And even my size and my body type and all that kind of thing was reinforced at all of the at the international training camps I would go to. When I was a collegiate athlete, it was always noted when I came back insanely ripped for pre-season. These were all things that were positively reinforced. And you're right. We're all swimming in water and we don't realize what we're drinking, and because it's just so normalized. And I think that was a huge part, and I see it as a huge part of the continued work, is being able to notice a system of oppression, which, to be honest, like the manipulation or presentation of the female body is very much a system of oppression that's been weaponized and monetized by wellness culture, by diet culture, by health and medical and all that kind of thing. And understanding when you can start pointing to say that's a system of oppression, where am I acting still as that system of oppression? Where have I embodied that and acted like that? And I like to kind of raise the awareness of this, because it's so easy to look at ourselves and think, how did I break myself? Like I really must hate myself. Like I really must not care about myself if I'm struggling in these ways, if I'm harming myself, if I'm doing things that don't make sense. We're taught this. It's in the water. But it is, and again, that is when it's our responsibility to become really, really, really aware of what we're taking in and where we're acting as a system of oppression, and freeing ourselves from that prison. And we have to free ourselves over and over and over again, because it's insidious and it's sneaky and it makes sense, but it's really hurting us in so many ways that we don't have awareness of.
There's something else I sort of wanted to touch on something I really enjoyed about your book is that a lot of times I've read, different biographies, autobiographies by people describing sort of disordered eating, and it feels very like victim energy,
Mm-hmm.
and it just never resonated with me, because during those times, I didn't feel like I was attacking myself. I didn't feel like I was weak. I felt so powerful. And it was almost my way of feeling better than competing with someone else. And I really saw that, other people, lack of control, they're so undisciplined. Look at, you know what I mean? It felt very empowering for me. And I felt that in your book, that I was like, okay, finally, somebody kind of gets that. And, can you speak to that a little bit? Because I think that that's often portrayed like that, this poor person, she's wanting to just disappear and she's starving herself, whereas actually it felt very empowering at the time.
100%. And I think that in shrinking my body, I became more visible. But it was a way of channeling all of that pain into visibility that empowered me rather than weakened me. I'm very honest about this. I've never felt stronger, more on purpose, more focused, more alive than those moments where I had nothing in my body. It felt like I kind of transcended human experience. Yeah. They really felt like spiritual experiences of emptiness, of being so maniacally focused on emptiness. It felt so, so powerful. And you're right. Like, I think that and again, people have different experiences, but my experiences was one of power. Shrinking gave me so much power. And it never was at a point where I was perceived as weak because of it. I never got to that sort of bone snapping phase of things. I was so powerful in my smallness. And there remains grief around that, because I don't like to say on the other side, but I've come so far from having to dominate myself in that way to feel safe. I've been able to loosen a huge amount of that rigidity and control, which, for reference, has given me so much energy to pour into actually fulfilling my childhood dreams of owning my own business, of writing a book, of doing lots of creative things and traveling and being a lot freer, and maybe not traveling in the last couple of years. But all of that energy has redistributed. It's allowed me to create so much more of the life that I actually wanted all this time. And I still grieve that tiny body. I still grieve that feeling of power, because I've never touched that feeling since. I really haven't. Like, publishing my book was an incredible achievement. but it didn't land in that way. And there's grief about that. I like to be honest about that. There are some things that you have to let go because you're wanting to be human now. You're wanting to live now. And there are some of those kind of very like robotic, ghostly characteristics that I just don't have access to anymore. And I'm very much getting on board with the fact that that's okay. Because it was almost like they were beyond what a human should experience. That's how intense they were.
And do you think that it's necessary to have those rock bottom moments where you realize I can't do this anymore, or even physically your body is telling you I really can't do this anymore? Or do you think someone listening to a podcast like this, or someone who's read your book, that just sort of identifies with it? Is that the process as well? Do you need the rock bottom moments to really be able to jump out of that area?
I love that you asked this question, because I really don't think you do need rock bottom moments. I really don't think you do. And it's funny that you mentioned this, because a lot of my clients, I wouldn't say have a rock bottom moment, but it's more that they've identified with the stories and the experiences that I talk about. So that feeling of assumed ease, all of those stories about it must be easy for you. Even the story of like, oh, she's so, like, everything comes so easy to her, she must be perfect. And that impossible feeling of expectation. And then also that disconnect between the inside and outside experience. A lot of my clients don't even struggle with food. Like, I'm thinking about all of my clients right now. I would say 80% of them, like, we don't talk about food. That's like not something that I actually really talk about much at all day to day. And it's a fascinating thing because it was such a huge part of my own experience. But a lot of my clients come to me, I would say, on more of a visibility mission, more of a sense of, can I get honest about what I'm actually experiencing? And they come to me because I am honest. I am very blunt. I'm very open. And they see something in that being able to be seen in that way that resonates with them. And so a lot of the work that I do with my clients is very much about them making themselves visible to themselves so that they can be visible in the world that they actually, in a way that they actually want to. So, for example, some of my clients come to me to like meet themselves so that they can become that person who has a career that's more aligned for them, or so that they can finally use their beautiful creative writing skills to perhaps share their work and maybe one day write a book. Or they're designers who come because they just can't quite share their work because they're not visible to themselves first. So that's a lot more of the work that I actually do day to day. It's like getting safe in your own bravery and vulnerability so that then you can use that out in the world. I say this over and over and over again, and I think it's really, really important because I think it's often misunderstood in sort of general wellness. The point of healing is not to keep healing. The point of healing is to heal enough so that you know who you are, so that you can then express yourself in the world the way you've always wanted to. And what that means is remembering who you were all along and being more of that woman over and over and over and over again. The point of healing is not to heal. The point of healing is to heal enough so that then you can be visible and live a life that you actually enjoy and that feels like you. I believe so strongly in that. Because I think we can get trapped in this cycle of, I should always be healing. I should always be healing. I should always be in development. And it's more like, no, like install baseline kindness and awareness, heal what you need to, be brave with yourself first, and then go and be brave in the world. That's like a really beautiful and generous life to live, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And I think I always sort of use the analogy of like we're born into this world purely authentic, and that it's like a brand new light bulb that you put up in an attic. And as you go through the world, you just pick up dust and everything like that. And the healing process is sort of cleaning away that dust so that you kind of shine your own radiance brightly.
Yeah.
And that's all it is. I think that we definitely, in the wellness world, in a similar way to the diet world, actually. We need to this, I've got to fix something. When I reach this goal, then I'll be good. You know, it's this exact same mentality. And so I think that's interesting that you don't talk too much about food, even though it was a part of your process. Because I just see that as a symptom. It's a very tangible way to claw back some control, you know, and so it can be expressed in so many different ways. So I think that's really interesting. So let's talk about some of the modalities that you used and you maybe are still using, actually. I know that inner child work was really a big thing for you, and it seems to be a theme running through your book for sure. So what's the importance of that kind of work, and what's your best advice for getting started?
Inner child work I love because it can sometimes be hard. It's a beautiful way to build compassion. Sometimes when we're adults, it can be hard to find that kindness and compassion and gentleness. And so connecting with younger versions of ourselves, I think, is a really beautiful portal into practicing that kindness. It's like giving yourself the childhood that you needed and that perhaps you didn't get in its full expression. So I love inner child work and reparenting. It's like you heal your past, you heal in the present. It's a very sort of mutually beneficial experience. And I also do a lot of what I would call embodiment-based practices. I love using breathwork, and I also love to empower my clients to understand their nervous system and how it's working for them always, because so often we can feel shameful about the things that we're using to get through the world. But when you look at it from the perspective of my body is always trying to take care of me, all my nervous system is ever trying to do is to keep me safe. We can start to have a different lens on how to begin to slowly let go of the ways that we're currently regulating our experience. Shrinking was the way that I did that, or binging was the way that I did that, and slowly beginning to replace those and also heal the trauma so we can re-regulate that beautiful wiring that's working for us always. So I love doing nervous system work. Breathing, breath work's a big part of that. And then I also love to think of daily practice, or not even daily practice, but more the practicing of bravery and viewing our lives as creative processes. So in a previous life, for most of my 20s, I've worked as a designer and then as a creative director. And so I'm a very visual and creative person. And a lot of my clients who come to me, they may not be artists in any way or even working in a creative way, but they have that part of them. And so I always like to tap in and see how they tap into themselves, whether that's through music or whether that is through more visualization type things, or whether that's through actually making or working on things while we're working together. I love to think of our lives as creative projects that we are endlessly practicing in. And so there's definitely a very sort of creative element to the way that I like to do this work, and that I found really resonates and lands with the women that I work with.
Wonderful. And I really love the black light method. I think it's phenomenal. So can you just explain to the listeners what the black light method is that you created?
Yeah, the black light method is really what I just described. So it's really looking at it through the lens of our bodies, in the sense of the regulation of our nervous systems, the understanding of that part of it, the use of embodiment tools and practices, and also understanding our body's story, like our body image and why we feel the way we do about ourselves. There's a worth component to it. So I always talk body worth power or body worth gifts. There's a worth component to all of this, which I view more as understanding our identity, how it's formed, where we believe we have value, why we believe we have value, what makes us valuable human beings. Because so often we have massive worthiness wounds, and especially as ghost women who are wildly productive and perhaps have that glitter, there's often a lot of that externalization of our worth into what we do, and very little integrated sense of I'm worthy regardless of what I do. And so I love to look at that lens. And then the power or the gift component is truly that base of, okay, so once I have awareness of my body, once I have awareness of my worth, as I'm in the process of healing that, how is the energy that was once looking and suffering and struggling? Where is this pulling me now? What gifts do I have to share with this world? How am I actually wanting to use my time and my energy? What does my career look like? What do my relationships look like? What is that one thing that I wish I had worked on all this time that I didn't have the ability to because I didn't believe in myself and I didn't have the energy to do it? And so, like, for the context for me, that thing was my book. It took me a couple of years to build that foundational sense of self, to then be able to say, I'm ready to share this gift with the world that was a childhood dream. It was with me all along, and it got lost in the process of all of that invisible, struggling, embodied war. Now that part of me is coming back alive again because I believe in myself, I believe that I can. Now I get to be generous. Now I get to share my gifts. Now I get to build that business that I used to always talk about. And again, it's not that every person has to start their own business or write a book. I don't care what you do. All I care about is that it's the thing that you actually want to do, that you're actually channeling your gifts in the world. That is such a beautiful thing to do. I always say again, like, we're not healing for healing's sake. We're healing so we can be ourselves, so that we can live our lives. And a huge part of that is also about being generous. Share that with the world in whatever way that makes sense for us.
I love this because I think it's a real sort of antidote to this sort of manifestation rhetoric that we hear a lot. And it's a very much a focus on what can I get? You know, and I think for me, I don't know, like, not that I have anything against manifestation, love it, but it's not, for me, it was never the focus. I kind of came into this sort of work because I sort of recognized I'm actually quite good at getting what I want, but there's a disconnect here because I'm not necessarily enjoying it, you know, and if the things that I want are not making me happy, where are these things coming from? And so I realized there just needed to be this inner alignment that maybe would shift, and the things that I want would maybe be different, and those things would be more satisfying. So I love that. I think it's a real antidote. Also, something else I really like about your work, which I find very different, is that there is a recognition of the body. And it's sort of almost body first and then through, because I think a lot of the practices that we have can be very disconnected from the body and very mind focused, very psychological focused. And, you know, I think that we forget that our body is holding all of those past experiences and those memories, those emotions. So I think it's so important to be able to tap into that and have that connection. So I think that's
Yeah, I love that. And I'm with you on the manifestation stuff. I often talk that my work kind of has like spiritual side eye. I am all about the magic of the universe. I don't believe in coincidences. I believe in the flow of energy. Absolutely. I've experienced it too many times in my life to not, but I can tell you this, that doesn't just fall into your lap. Like, we're not, like, we are humans, human bodies. We have lived experiences. We have belief systems. Like, that has to be examined and felt through, not thought through. And I talk about this a lot. We have to practice. We have to, like, allow ourselves to go through a process of practicing being ourselves. We can't just manifest stuff out of thin air if we, like you said beautifully, if we're not internally aligned with ourselves. If we don't know who we are, how can we possibly know what we need or want? If we don't know who we are, like, how can we possibly know that? And that's why I love the idea of taking that inside out approach. It's like, you take care of what's going on inside, your world is going to shift externally. It can't fail to shift if you're aligning with who you are. Your world is going to reflect who you are in time, and with like conscious practice. So much gaslighting going on about it's like hold this one crystal and think about what you want. Like, yes, like beautiful, use whatever tools resonate with you, but you're in process too. You're an active participant in your life. And that's the real world. Like, that's living in the real world.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, I love all the things. I love all the spiritual materialism, I have to say. But I won't say that it's necessarily brought me the breakthrough. I think that the sort of narrative around, thinking positive, stay in the vortex. And I'm not criticizing any of these manifestation practices. I think they really work for people. And I think, if it makes you feel good, do it, I'm not against any kind of practice, actually. But I can honestly say from my own personal experience that I have never found as much breakthrough in trying to stay positive than actually learning to sit with the discomfort, and in that the positive comes because I've released the discomfort, and so I definitely am on that page with you in that respect. So let's shift and let's talk about brave things. I think it's something very, very exciting. What can we expect from the experience of brave things?
Yeah, thanks for asking about it. So I've been sort of operating as Iona Holloway for the last year and a bit, and I was really feeling a pull towards moving away from just using my name for things and creating a place and a community and perhaps more of a movement or approach to doing and being, and that was just separate from Iona the individual. So over the last couple of, maybe not last couple of months, over the last month or so, I've been doing a lot of work behind the scenes of building up Brave Thing, which is really going to be what all of my speaking, coaching, and books, plural, will be living under. And it's really going to be, I'm really hoping to bring together some kind of community space, whether that is group coaching programs or just a slightly lighter touch community space, because I think something that I've realized a lot doing a lot of one-on-one coaching with ghost women is that there's a huge amount of value in that work. And then there's also a huge amount of value of being witnessed by other women who also have felt that invisible feeling and who've had those shared experiences. I talked a wee bit earlier about visible to ourselves and then the world. I found in my work to this point that there's this almost missing piece of visible to ourselves, to each other, and to the world. And that's that kind of white space gap that I'm really hoping to fill by creating more of a community space for women who identify with that feeling of struggling invisibly and alone, who perhaps will have those island or lone wolf tendencies, to come and practice their bravery and their vulnerability with other women who get it. So that's what I'm in the process of building right now. And so I'm thinking that like by the autumn and by the fall, I'm going to have a really clear vision of what that's going to look like. I also view it as, and maybe this is too much detail, I don't know, I think it's important for me is that I want work to be accessible for all levels of what people can financially contribute. And while I love one-on-one work, it is a wee bit ivory tower. It's very much for those who can afford it. And I'm always looking for ways to democratize the sharing of this work that changed my life. So the creation of Brave Thing is very much part of that feeling as well.
Wonderful. And so tell us whereabouts our listeners can find your work.
Yeah. So the best place to find me is ionaholloway.com, and especially ionaholloway.com/gifts. There's lots of free things there. There's a free week of coaching, like future self stuff that I do often in the first few weeks of working with my clients. It's all there, the whole week of coaching. Please take it. It's yours. You can also read the first chapter of Ghost for free. And I think I also have a free ghost reader guide as well. If that's something that you're interested in. So please take advantage of free things. And then you can also find me mostly on Instagram at the moment. I'm Iona Holloway there as well. And then in the future, I'll be at bravething.co as well. But we're in the process of building that just now.
Wonderful. So exciting. And so what is one practical tip that you could, or a practice that you can leave our listeners with that they can implement today?
I love this question. One of my favorite things to ask myself is, under the assumption that I care about myself, and then ask the question that we have. I think that we often get into why am I like this? Why am I doing this? Why am I like this? I always like to trade that in of, under the assumption that I care about myself, why am I doing this thing? Because we're always trying to take care of ourselves. We're always doing it, even when we don't think we are. We're beautiful, self-protective beings. And like I said earlier, one of the first things that we can install in ourselves is baseline kindness and awareness. And so I love that question as a way to do that.
That's so powerful. Now, Iona, we have really covered a lot of stuff today, but is there anything that you really have on your heart to share that I haven't asked you about?
Start where you are. You don't have to reach a rock bottom, and it's never, ever, ever too late to try something new. If you let yourself be a beginner, you cannot fail. If you allow yourself to practice, you will not fail. It is worth it. It is worth it. Whatever you have to give, to turn towards yourself and prioritize yourself, be generous. It's generous for you, and it's generous for the world and time as well. Start small. You'll grow really, really tall.
Wonderful, wonderful. And on that note, Iona, thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for sharing your gifts with the world. Much appreciated. And see you soon.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is wonderful.
I hope you enjoyed this episode and you got some things to take away from our amazing guests' insight. If you did enjoy this episode, please subscribe and also leave us a review. And for more information on the Hadassah Collective, you can visit our Instagram page at Hadassah Collective. I hope you'll join me again for our next episode at the same time next week. And until then, have a wonderful week.